we're going to get back into Photoshop for round 2 of our Photoshop demo. We're going to talk specifically about the collage project, the retro collage project again. I do want to quickly draw your attention to the fact that over here in our browser, I have a version of the page. Oh, tragic. I have to move myself to be able to click on it. Let's see. I do have a version, of the homepage that you see, and the throwback collage assignment, I've extended the deadline to September 28th. And this was partially because of COVID and just kind of people freaking out about, obviously everything. But also, I think it was just generally, I didn't really feel like I had scheduled the class with enough time for you all to do the assignments. And I know it takes a little bit of time to kind of like try things out and, give yourself some space to experiment a little bit. So I'm actually planning, and I'll be doing this later today, I'm planning on pushing everything, all the assignment due dates are going to go forward 1 week. That is, after all, our motto here at UW, forward. So we'll be pushing this forward 1 week, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that should just give us a little bit more kind of flexibility and be able to kind of move through this with a little bit less urgency, which nobody needs urgency at this time, coming from, your art class. So that is all I had to say about the sort of like general course stuff. So if we move into Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to create a new item. I'm just going to go back to this thing that we already made. And as you may remember, we were sort of thinking about this little shark over here. And I think I'm going to put myself over here for now, because there's not much in here that I'm going to... maybe here is better. I'm trying to find a section of the screen that I'm not going to use. So yeah, we have our sort of like silly layer here of the fish. And if I make this layer invisible, I can certainly then see the additional, the additional duplicate layer that has a layer mask applied to it. Now, I think that this layer mask, in all kind of candor, it's a little on the silly side. I'm probably going to just make it invisible and come back to it later. I'm thinking that it has some good things going for it. I'm definitely going to do something with these brown plants down here, whatever those are, just to be kind of like a pop of an accent color. So I am probably going to mess with the color of those things. I think I want to take a little bit more of a approach of using something in this image to create a visual element. And you may notice that I put up a kind of to-do list, and I try to do this every time I do a demo. It's really just a shorthand to-do list with, what are we actually talking about today? And so you can see that right here, Photoshop demo collaging strategies. I'll go ahead and publish it. And it's just a quick list to kind of remind yourself what the functions that we used are actually called, in case you need to look them up or anything like that. And I will go ahead and put links to all the Adobe information about the functions that we're using. So just quick FYI, that's kind of a general practice that I'm going to be doing all throughout the semester. So if we go to Photoshop, back here in Photoshop, so I have 2 sort of projects that I want to take on for this image, making it into an interesting collage. I want to do something with this layer. I want to do something with this image as a whole. And, I'm not like a genius myself. I've certainly been doing creative work for a while, but one of the inherent kind of qualities about this project is that it's asking you to kind of go in without a really strong plan. So if you're a planner, this might drive you crazy if you're a type A planner person. What I'm asking you to do is actually to observe images and observe areas of the images that you think are visually interesting and build on them. So for example, we have this really small kind of cap of the ceiling right there, which I think is actually kind of awesome. And then also, I think this tree is probably another area that we could think about working with. The only downside to this tree would be that it's going to be pretty complicated to select it out. So we're going to talk quite a bit more about selection tools. We spent some time last video with the magic wand tool. And we'll be spending most of the video on selection tools. So the other strategy is I want to take a couple of other images and bring them in to kind of integrate with this. So in the sort of, spirit of retro collage, this is about as, this is way more retro than most people are going to get. This garden is from the Victorian era. It's in a small island in Scotland, south of Glasgow. And as part of my research, I went out to the British Isles and kind of did like a 2-month tour of fern gardens, that specifically fern gardens that were made in the Victorian and then following into the Edwardian era. And so as I look for this, work stuff, as I look for this folder of images, so I'm going to kind of take my collage here in a sort of theme that is maybe, before any of our lifetimes. So I have a stack of images here, and a couple of them sort of speak to that. Let's see. Might be over here. Nope. I'm gonna go ahead and open this up. Yes, here we go. So I have here, these are ferns that were actually captured in print also in the Victorian era. And I got these images. They're huge. For library images. They're 4,000 by 5,000 pixels. I got these from the New York Public Library's digital archive. So I'm going to go ahead and probably use this fern image, so I can just drop it into Photoshop, and it just opens up there. And I think also another, geez Louise. Having a little happy time today. I think also another kind of interesting strategy might be to work with this lace, which was kind of belonged to one of the people who owned one of these gardens. Oops. Wanted to get that. Excuse me. Coming through. I wanted to get that up here so it opens a new document. Yay. And then lastly, I'm not sure if I'm going to use this or not, but I have this image of a roof from another garden, and I think it could be potentially handy because it would certainly relate to the image that we're looking at. Okay, so that's sort of the set of images that I'm starting with. Now, just on a kind of creative level, am I going to use all these images? Do I have to use all these images? I don't know. You just gotta, kind of do it and see if you like it. And if you don't like it, or if it doesn't look good, then do something else. I think that, you're not going to find like a real sort of super tight set of rules for how to compose these assignments. We're just going to try to give you all the tools and all the strategies. And then it's really kind of up to your own creativity. So if I were to kind of move into doing this fern. I know we used the magic wand tool before, and that actually is probably the best thing to do here. I think I might use a different method just to kind of show us another method. The first thing I'm going to do before I try to use any selection tools to select this is I'm actually going to crop it. Because the selection tools work mostly on areas of dark and light, if I were to ask if I were to use color range, for example, and, select this, it would also select this. If I were to select the white, it would also select this. And it would just make for a messy selection that had where we had a little bit of extra work to do. So I'm going to use the crop tool, and I'm just going to move the corners in so that they're past all of the kind of extraneous stuff that is around our image. Now, I just want to say, if you're sort of thinking this, if you already know how to use Photoshop, which a few of you do, this is probably one of the easiest images ever to select. And the reason that it's one of the easiest images ever to select is that it looks really complicated, but it's basically against a completely white background. So all we have to do is use the magic wand tool, or we could probably use the quick selection tool if we wanted. Sometimes the quick selection tool is really good, and other times it's not the greatest tool. Here you can see it definitely does the job. This is my usual issue with the quick mask tool, or with the quick selection tool rather, is that it kind of is a bit too aggressive. So you have to have a pretty clear delineation between the background and the thing. And so when we look at it at this scale, you may say, oh, well, duh, I do have a clear delineation. Whoops, excuse me. I just got slippery fingers. I do have a clear delineation. Well, let's zoom in there and really check. It turns out maybe not so much. It's got all this sort of really light, green stuff. But it's not, as you can see, it's definitely not white. So I think that this is a cue for the magic wand tool. And I can go ahead and just hit Apple D or Command D or Control D if you're on a PC to deactivate that selection. And I want to go ahead and come into this selection a little bit more. So I clicked on it, and you can see, wow, I mean, that just did an amazing job. Did really well. I had it set aggressively enough. This is actually a bit aggressive. So I had it set aggressively enough that it didn't pick up a lot of this, what in there's a technical term for that. It's called schmutz. Any of this stuff kind of around the edges of the stem area. And you can also see it definitely did not go in to the areas that it's looking at. And so that's one of the reasons it did that, is because we actually had it set to contiguous. And so when you do that, I'm going to hit Apple D. If we click here, it's only going to click the white pixels that it can touch from touching. It's like touching things, touching things, touching things, touching things. Like, imagine that it has OCD cleanliness issues, and it really just needs to get, pixels, only pixels that it's touched, or it's touched, or that it's touched. So these pixels in here, at no point would they be touched by any pixels outside of the area. So I usually leave mine on contiguous because you get some pretty unpleasant surprises if you don't. And this is real easy to add. So what we find ourselves with is a selection that basically has a bunch of holes in it, or areas where we want to put a bunch of holes in it. So here we can just hit Shift, and then we can add those little areas back in. If you're not a keyboard presser kind of person, you can also hit this button up here, and and then it turns it into what it calls additive mode. So, you know, if you're doing a lot of clicking, it might, you know, make your finger feel slightly better. I joke, but Photoshop can be amazingly labor intensive if you let it. So we're still in additive mode, so I can grab this chunk here, and you can see that it's still in contiguous mode. So you may be asking, like, well, why didn't it pick this up? And that's because, well, technically they're not touching. So, okay. And I go all the way down to the bottom just to check it, and it looks like there's another little thing hiding there. Now you may be asking yourself, what about some of these other, you know, issues where it maybe looks like it's kind of intruded on the scan a little bit? Yeah, I mean, that's really, really subtle. And I sort of feel like at a certain point with this stuff, you kind of have to just make a determination that you're kind of not going to go any further. So I think that if I wanted to, for example, catch these tiny little pieces here without doing what I just did, which was kind of creating like a pretty big area of negative space, like it kind of ate into a couple of these micro leaves, I would have to do what's called lowering the tolerance. So I'm just going to Command Z out of that. So right now my tolerance is 40, which is great for like a general scan. But probably if we wanted to now add some of this stuff back, I would maybe put it on like 15, because we're dealing at this point with areas, and it's a little bit less aggressive at that tolerance. So we're dealing with very tight sort of, you know, differences in tone and color. And so one thing we can do is we can actually switch into subtractive mode, and we could maybe bring back a couple of these. Whoops, too far. That happens a lot. You kind of have to like click on it and see. And so if that does happen, that's what your history palette and Control Z are for. So this was too close to white here. And it just kind of decided that it was going to take all that stuff out of the scan, which is not what I was looking for. So the other thing to think about, if you look at something like this and you say, if you're a perfectionist and you're like, oh my God, it isn't perfect. Well, it's a bad time in general for perfection, but especially with something like this, let's go ahead and like maybe get some context, okay? So our image over here is 8.5 by 11 at 300 DPI, okay? And this fern image, I can keep my selection active while I do this. This fern image, if we go to image size, I'll convert these to inches just so we can make a fair comparison. It's 9 by 15 at 300 PPI. So that's about a little more than, you know, probably like 1 2/3 as big. So it's big is basically what I'm saying. Okay, so now imagine that this little tip of the fern here, I'm going to put a little marker here for just a quick sec. I'm going to put like a red marker here so we can kind of just have a visual analysis here. I'm going to, or pink. I like pink. Great. So this kind of marking off, you know, like where I think this area is. Now let's go ahead and zoom out. Okay. So it's going to be like this big if we use the entire image on our composition. And that's kind of one of the things that you need to be conscious of when you're editing in Photoshop, is that you can get your mental kind of concept of scale can get really messed up. And you can work on every little pixel, but you usually don't need to. So this is pretty much ready to go. There's just one small detail. So if I were to, at this point, if I were to make a layer mask, what would I do? Last time I know when we made a layer mask, we asked it to reveal the selection. In this case, because we selected everything around the object, we would want to hide the selection. So I'm going to go ahead and make a layer mask to hide the selection. And as promised, it did that quite beautifully. And you know, again, you can kind of zoom in here and it's not quite perfect, but you know, it's fine. So now if I want to go ahead and take this layer mask out into my collage, I can actually just drag the layer in, and it's going to import with the layer mask, which is awesome. So as I said, this fern file is a teeny bit bigger than our sort of canvas here. So we can, you know, kind of make that right really easily. Probably the first thing I would do is get onto the Move tool. I may not have mentioned this yet, but the Move tool is like a great kind of default tool. And by default tool, I mean, it's a great tool to have activated when you're not doing anything. Or you're kind of just, you know, exploring things, or you're in between processes and you want to kind of get information. Because when you have the Move tool activated, you know, you can get information about the coordinates of all of your stuff. So right now, this layer, if you're one of those people who likes to like type things in, you can actually just, you know, relocate it by the pixel. So here, if we want to just change that location, we can make it at 1000 px and then it moves. So this whole kind of, you know, dashboard is really nice. You can also, you know, use these numerical inputs to scale and all sorts of other stuff. And so basically I just scaled this down a little bit using the bounding box. If you haven't gotten this far and you're following along, you may be asking yourself, how do I scale it? What the hell? That's a fair question. Okay, two things. You make sure your show transform control box up here is enabled. And that kind of allows for transform controls in many of these processes. So I usually leave it on. Sometimes I get a little bit like visually distracted by the box and I turn it off. Another way, if you really hate the show transform controls, you can actually go to edit and transform. And this is a whole menu of ways that you can transform the active layer, whatever that is. In other words, whichever layer is clicked on over here. So let's try doing one of those just for fun. And we'll go ahead and just scale it. Scale. Maybe a tiny bit smaller too. Great. And you may have also noticed there's a box there called Free Transform that allows you to scale, rotate, and do a couple of other basic things. That's kind of an old school way of doing it, but one of the nice things about the Free Transform function is that it has a really nice hotkey. So if you just do Apple T, it'll bring up that transformation box. Okay. Collaging. So one of the things that I'm going to do, instead of sort of like riffing on one image at a time, I'm actually going to go ahead and remove the border from or remove the background from most of these all these images. And that'll be great practice for us for getting, different selection methods. But it will always also be a great way for us to, think about how we may use them in the collage. So now that I'm done with this fern, I can save it. I can just save it. I may want to save it with the layer mask. That's usually a really good idea, because if you go through the labor of making a layer mask, it is usually nice not to have to do that twice. And so professional photographers will do that a lot when they're doing product or magazine work. So fun story, I used to have a job photographing resin toilets seats with shells embedded in them. And we just did thousands and thousands of photographs of these toilet seats, me and my partner. And anyway, we masked them out in Photoshop and provided them to our customer that way. And so it was just a way for us to make extra money, was, kind of like adding on one more thing so that the graphic designer didn't have to do it. That's a Florida job right there. Shells with, or toilet seats with shells embedded in them. Everyone has to start somewhere. So for my purposes, I'm not going to save this, but I usually do if it's, for my own work. I'll save the layer masks. And let's move on to this lace image. So this lace image, oy vey, this is kind of like a little bit on this is like Photoshop on nightmare level, which isn't to say that it can't be done. I think that if we were to use a couple of different methods, I definitely think we could take care of this side of the lace and this side of the lace with the magic wand tool. One thing I'm noticing about the lace is that it's multicolored, which actually makes it even more difficult to work with. Like if it were all yellow, we would be done already. We could just go to select color range and do a color range selection. So I think I'm going to start kind of following a little bit of my own advice, and that is kind of cropping out some of the extraneous stuff that I don't feel like I really need. And so I definitely don't need anything on the other side of this thing. And just visually, like I was thinking about using it as a kind of, horizontal element in the collage. So I don't think that it really makes sense for me to have this corner piece at this moment. So that gets us there. Okay, so it's still pretty nightmare-y, to be honest. Let's go ahead and get in there with the magic wand tool and see what we can do. Again, the object selection tool and the quick selection tool, we actually will use them at some point, but they're really intended for objects that are simple and clearly delineated from the background. They also, because they're using AI algorithms, they tend to work better on people because they have, image recognition techniques built into them. The magic wand tool is really kind of working on the raw pixels. So it's literally asking itself in, its software netherworld brain, what pixels are next to me and are they like this pixel? If they're like this pixel, then select them. If they're not like this pixel, then don't select them. And that's controlled by a kind of threshold. So I think the easiest thing at this point would be to select this white chunk right here. Now, you may notice that we turned down the tolerance when we were making our other selection. So that's what you get. It's very sort of hesitantly selecting. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command D. And I think I'm going to move the tolerance up to, this is the standard value for tolerance in Photoshop. It's 32. And that seems okay-ish. I just thought of a really easy way to get rid of this bottom border, and that would be to kind of crop it out. Although, this is pretty normal. So it's hard to set the tolerance at exactly the right number because we don't all just think about that all day. So here, if you've got a little extra, weirdness, I call this weirdness, these little extra pieces here. You can certainly get in there and start to kind of select some of that stuff. Now, this is where I say it's like kind of on nightmare level because of these shadows and how it was scanned. When you select one shadow, it starts to kind of eat into other areas of the scan. So I'm going to tell you what the best way to do this scan is, and I don't necessarily expect everybody to do their scans this way, but if you do have a really complicated object, this is probably how I would go ahead and do it. So I'm actually just going to hit, I have no idea what I just did. My finger just whisked over the keyboard. So, okay, so here, I'm going to go one step back because it did kind of eat in a little bit here when I started to get into the scan. And part of the reason is because I kind of got into this dark shadow, and it's really hard for it to tell the difference between this dark shadow and this area that's actually part of what we want to preserve. So I'm going to go maybe 2 steps back, actually. No, not that far. Well, yeah. Excuse me. Okay, so I think that's about as good as we're going to get right now with the Magic Wand tool, before we kind of start getting into trouble. Okay, so you may be asking yourself, well, what else is there to do? Well, we're still going to go ahead and do some other stuff with the Magic Wand tool. And we may, at this point, actually, if we eliminate this white stuff and we eliminate this white stuff, we can probably go in and do a color range thing, or the other technique, which I'm going to show you right now. And this is where Photoshop really becomes kind of an art unto itself. Would be what's known as the quick mask mode. And the quick mask mode is this teeny weeny button underneath your foreground and background color. And if you go to the quick mask mode, you find that you get this red overlay over your image, and you can basically use the brush tool to put it on. I'm gonna Control Z that because I just wanted to demonstrate. And you can also use the eraser to take the red stuff off. Now, and then when you go in, I'll go ahead and just make a couple of adjustments here of the red stuff. So I'm just gonna kind of like roughly get in there. And now when we come back out of quick mask mode, you can see that that has been incorporated into our selection. So it's a toggle mode. And, you know, to be honest, I would not expect anybody to do this for the assignment. This is just like absurdly complicated. But, you know, I certainly won't stop you. I think that if you have a tablet, this type of selection where you're actually using a brush is like a million times easier. Doing it on a trackpad or doing it with a mouse is, yeah, it's just hurts. It's so hard. And so, you know, what are some things you can do? Well, if you have literally like a little graphics tablet, I'm not talking about an iPad or, you know, a Fire or anything like that, although those can be good too. A little graphics tablet is just, you can buy them at your local computer store or on the internet. It's a stylus with a pad, and so you can plug it into your laptop and actually be able to use a stylus to draw. So that can be really great. The other thing that you can do is you could upload this image to some sort of cloud storage. And then if you do have a tablet, you could use a stylus on your tablet, like your iPad or your whatever, PC-based tablet you might have. And you could potentially, edit it using your tablet, and then kind of bring it back to your laptop. But I would only recommend that on stuff where you really need the stylus, because you're not going to get a lot of the other functionality of Photoshop with a tablet. So that being said, I think at this point I'm going to try a couple more tricks with this and see how far we get. So one thing that I'm going to go ahead and do is try the grow function for the selection. And you can see it started to kind of like move in a little bit closer on the shadows. And then we can also try this similar function, which that shook out a lot of stuff. As you can see, it also selected a lot of stuff that we want to keep. So that's probably pretty useless. I think to really get the most of this, I think you would have to probably use it with, some sort of like, paint the selection in. And that's something that people do. I mean, for professional compositors. Oh, hello. Oh, good Lord. Sorry, phone. Professional compositors, will spend weeks working on just one frame of a movie. And so, that's not what we're doing in this class, but it's a thing that exists out in the world. So in order to get this image into a kind of format where we can really do something with it, I'm going to go ahead and just so it's got some kind of similarities to itself, I'm going to go ahead and go back into the Magic Wand tool. Actually, I'll use the Quick Mask tool, and I'm just going to take the paintbrush tool, and I'm going to turn the opacity all the way up to 100, because right now it's at kind of a low opacity. You can see it didn't like annihilate those holes right away, and when I turn it up to 100%, it does. And so I can just go in and edit. This is also, by the way, an amazing way to kind of edit scans and selections that have gone a little wonky. So if you start to see like, invasion on the edges of your scans into what you actually want to preserve in the image, this can be a really great technique. And so I'm just really quickly coming in here. And this is usually about as intensive as I would get with Quick Mask, but like I said, some people make a career out of it. So now we can come out of Quick Mask, so just push this little button, and we would basically do the same thing that we just did. We could say, okay, layer mask. In this case, we're going to hide the selection. And I think we can now just drag this to our canvas. Okay, and I think I'm going to skip the roof for now because we have some other things to do here, and it looks like my lace did not come through, so yes. Okay, so probably first thing I want to do with this thing is just go ahead and, well, kind of like it vertical actually now that we're here. I like the visual relationship between the grid, and then this has a sort of grid to it too. You may be like thinking, oh my god, is she going to use that because it still has this stuff in it? Never fear, I will use blending modes to forgive my laziness. It's really not laziness, it's lack of time. So this, I think we want to probably take this guy, and I'd like to duplicate it a few times and go ahead and just make like a make a sort of like star shape. So I think to do that, I can just control click on a Mac, and let's see, duplicate the layer. Layer 2 copy is fine. I'm going to click my Show Transform Controls box for this. And basically, I'm just going to rotate, and I'm going to move it just a little bit. So I can move it by, I basically want this sort of peak point right here to be the kind of axis of rotation. And if it's not exactly right at this moment, don't worry about it. We're just kind of getting it set up. So here you go ahead and make another layer duplicate. And okay. As far as the angle of rotation goes right now, I'm eyeballing it. But you can certainly set that in the transform menu if you're, as I said, one of those numerically inclined people. And I think I'll do one more. I don't actually want like a full star because that would have a certain amount of like symmetry that I don't think this image necessarily calls for. Okay, so it's not perfect. Whoops, excuse me. It's not perfect, but it's there. And here we're going to talk about a couple of new things. You may have seen I just moved that individual leaf over, and that seems highly inefficient, like a highly inefficient way to deal with a bunch of stuff. So the first thing you can do is you can do what's called linking layers, although I won't even bother showing you that because what's vastly superior to that is hitting Shift, selecting multiple layers. So select this layer, hit Shift, select this layer, and new group from layers. And we can call it Fern Thingy. I do like to actually name my layers. That's not something we've really talked about up to this point, but you know, in practice, it's really, really helpful. And especially if you're making a really complex composition, if you name your layers, it's a lot easier to identify them in the layers palette because, you know, you only get this tiny little preview. Although, by the way, you can get a larger preview if you really want to. Okay, so now that it's a layer group, I can move it around as a single layer. And this is the coolest part. Check it out. I can apply operations to it like a single layer. So I can lower the opacity as much as I want here, really. So one thing that I kind of want is right now it's kind of pointed in the wrong direction. So you can see how it's sort of, you know, has an orientation where it's like got a straight line here and then it's got these kind of, you know, leaves coming out. I actually want it to flip over like that so that the fronds are pointed towards the image. And you may be wondering why didn't I just design it that way? I don't know. So let's see. We can go to Edit and then Transform. And at this point, you can see we have a flip horizontal and flip vertical. And so we want to flip vertical. Wrong, flip horizontal. I always get them mixed up. There we go. Looks good like that. Okay, so I think now I sort of feel like I can work with this. So that's somewhere over there. And I can't promise that we're going to generate a perfect sort of composition, but I think we'll get something that's kind of cool. By the end of our video today. One of the things about Photoshop that you may learn, especially when you're dealing with things like this, when we start getting into like layer blending, which is the absolute next thing we're going to do, you can literally like tweak the sliders for a million years, and, you know, explore like endless variations of one thing. So one of the hardest things I think about, you know, putting together your own artwork in any media is knowing when to kind of shut it down, because there is a point at which you can quote unquote overwork something. In other words, like, I don't know, have too much cowbell, or just have you know, take it past a point where it looked really awesome because your nerves kind of led you to keep working on it. So sometimes it's okay to just come up with something and then like walk away for a while and then come back and take a look at it, rather than kind of just working on it and working on it and working on it. I'm a huge fan and a huge believer in taking breaks. And that's not just because breaks are awesome. It's because breaks are really, really useful to kind of clear your mind and clear your visual fields too, from, you know, kind of what you're constantly looking at this thing when you're working on it. So it's easy to get overloaded. Now, back to the ranch here. I am going to take this lacy thing, and I think you can see I'm not using the whole thing right now, so I'm going to go ahead and scale it down so I'm using more of it. Perfetto. Okay, so I think in order to do the next thing that I do, oh, I got ahead of myself. I, of course, have to check this little checkbox here to commit the transform. That's an everyday blunder right there. So I've got this layer. This right now, this is on top. So you can see our stacking order right here. I may actually make the layers palette just a tiny bit bigger because we're going to be doing more with it. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop it out. Make it bigger. Okay, so this is fine where it is for now. I want to duplicate it. And one of the things that you get out of kind of duplicating the layers, by the way, is you're getting a sort of like a little bit of a guarantee that you have some unity and some harmony in your image, because there are similar elements at different places on the page. So when you think about those words like balance, rhythm, harmony, using the same element more than once is definitely a great way to create, you know, that illusion of rhythm. Balance really has to do more with how the visual weight or the visual sort of material is distributed across a screen. And so you may find yourself, you know, having an image where everything is on one side of the page, like everything's all the way over here. That's generally not a great thing. It's not a great idea. You can see in our image here, we have you know, a fair amount of stuff all over the image. I think this image's biggest problem right now is that it's a little cluttered, and so we're actually going to kind of push things back visually by using the layer blending modes. And so I think what I'm going to do here is I just got to move this into place. And I might go ahead and rotate it just a little tiny bit more. No, too far. I can rotate it again more later. Notice, by the way, that it has a layer mask. So if I wanted to add stuff to that layer mask, I could click on the layer mask, and chiefly I want to get rid of this stuff. So I could actually use the magic wand tool again and start removing that stuff from the layer mask, or in this case, adding. So let's see. Let me get this whole selection done then. So I'm hoping that it preserves these little yellow stitches, because that would look really cool. Sometimes I have to get really close to the screen because I can barely see what I'm doing. Sorry. Okay, that's probably fine. So, so here, because our mask is basically inverted, what we need to do is we need to go in and use the eraser tool. And so that should take care of it. Or let's see, opacity, no. Maybe clear. That took care of it. Interesting. We'll have to come back to that. Anyway, so I'm gonna just get rid of this fern thingy right now because I kind of can't see under it. And it looks like I'm actually gonna get rid of these two as well because I just kind of can't see what's going on here. And so everything looks okay. This is definitely a case for disabling the transform controls. And I'm actually going to see if I can use the arrow. Well, it's not selected. So I want to just kind of make a straight cut with this eraser tool. So I'm going to do that by making it slightly larger. I'm also going to make it less hard. So right now, as you can see, it has like a really, pretty hard edge. And I kind of fuzzed it up a little bit. So you can see here that it's a little fuzzy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start here and I'm going to use the shift key to kind of take care of some of this stuff. And by using the shift key, it basically draws a straight line. And I want it to be a straight line, even though it's kind of not. It's, you know, curvy. Because, and I'm going to come into some of these stitches just so I can get kind of a little more consistency. Like I said, drawing with the mouse, which is basically what I'm doing right now, is some people are really good at it. I'm like not very good at it, but it's something that I generally try to stay away from, but here we are. So, and you know, this is like a detail, but it's probably going to make it look a lot better. And, you know, I think sometimes details matter. So, and I definitely don't want this harsh edge here. So I'm just going to kind of loop through this with an eraser just so it looks kind of decent. Okay, I am ready to do more with this. Okay, so you still may be rightly saying, holy crap, it still doesn't look like it should go like that. It's like a full photograph. That looks crazy. And you're not wrong. What we're going to do is we're going to use layer blending modes to basically like kind of get rid of all this stuff in the middle. So I do think I want to rotate it just a tiny bit, so I can use that free transform, oh please, the free transform warp, or I could just put my transform controls back on. Either one of those things would work. And yes, it did need to be rotated just a little bit for sure. I kind of wanted these stitches to kind of go over that thing. Okay, great. And probably, I think I'm gonna cut it off right about here. So I'm gonna take my eraser tool and just make like a cut in it. And this is sort of like very, okay, so I made kind of like an alleyway here. And then I'm gonna go to my eraser tool and I'm gonna select a bigger brush. Why? because it will take me significantly less time to get rid of this if I have a large brush. But I'm always a little careful about using large brushes because it's really easy to do this. And then you obviously have to undo it. So I try to, kind of like use the brush that has the detail that I want for the edge that I want, and then get rid of all of the rest with a giant brush. Okay, so we're gonna blend. So let's do some blending. Probably let's start with this one over here, and some blending modes that I thought might be specifically good for this image would be something like the linear burn, the color burn, all kinds of weird stuff that we can do. Keep in mind also that we can just lower the opacity, and so many blending modes. Whichever blending mode that I do end up assigning to this, oh, that's kind of crazy. Ooh, I like that. So, I know what most of these look like, but you kind of never know what they're going to look like with any given image. So I think it's a good practice to just kind of like scroll through the list and see what they do. That actually looks kind of cool. I almost never use difference, but I think I'm going to. And it's a little harsh right now, so I'm gonna see what it looks like at like, nope, don't like that at all. It definitely looks better with the fully saturated colors. Yeah. And if I were taking my super duper time with this, which I'm not, I would maybe consider refining some of these edges. So if we're doing difference, I'll go to the next one and set it up for difference. If these are going to have the same layer blending mode, it could be to our advantage to put them in a layer group. I don't know. I don't know if I can do all this purple. I mean, it is cool, but like, I kind of can't deal. So I think I'm going to go for a multiply mode. And what multiply does is it basically deletes all the light pixels and it only makes it darker than the thing that is beneath it. So multiply is a fantastic layer blending mode. It's kind of my go-to for a lot of stuff. Multiply and screen, which screen makes everything lighter. So, and then overlay is another really popular one that I use a lot. In any case, I think I'm going to go for, well, yeah, overlay I think is better in this case. I wanted something that would retain the color. That's what I was really looking for. Okay, so now we're like in some biosphere and the crocheting monsters are all coming to get us. So that's what's happening right now, and I'm totally fine with that. So our fern thingy is over here, and the fern thingy, I think I'm going to address these two layers, this layer at the bottom that we said we would never use again. I think I'm going to go ahead and look at what this layer is going to do. And so we just have this one layer. It's basically, a mask with a fish. And we also have this sort of, pop in color here. So if we go to this right now, you may observe that you can't really see it. And the reason you can't see it is because it's just replicating the pixels that are underneath it right now. Because we haven't really done anything to it in terms of coloration or, even if we got the move key on or turn the move tool on, we could do that. And then we would be like, oh yeah, there it is. So anyway, I don't want to retain that change, but we'll be able to kind of bring it out presently. And so I think what we should go ahead and do is try for some of these modes. And what I'm really kind of focusing on in this case is the sort of vegetation underneath, just for color's sake. And I kind of can't handle the fish anymore, so I'm gonna go, whoops, excuse me, extra click there. So I'm gonna go in here and I'm going to erase, is it erase? No, not erase, brush. I always get that mixed up. It's either erase or brush, depending on what was in if you're revealing or hiding your layer mask. So if I get the brush, I can just kind of edit this fish out. And that's a really nice way to kind of like retain flexibility for when you make, unfortunate decisions based on, COVID boredom. You can get rid of them. And like I said, I'm just working with a really large brush, so I can really quickly get through it. Whoosh, done, you're gone. So, and we have our nice like fluorescent red vegetation. So that was just kind of a good way to like make the color stand out a little bit more. And then, what else does this need? I think one thing that we could probably think about doing is a layer on top of this that has some sort of a color element to it. So let's say, for example, I wanted to make a selection. So I'm using the Polygonal Lasso tool right now, which is a huge time saver. You can just see how quickly I made that selection. You just click and drag, and then click, and it makes a corner, and then you click again and drag. Anytime I need something that's honestly a quick selection, I usually go for the Polygonal Lasso tool. It's a lot easier to control than the quick selection tool. And if you have kind of complex areas that a brightness based selection tool might not work on, the Polygonal Lasso is just amazing. So I've got this kind of geometric shape here, and I think I'm going to add actually this round thing to my sort of selection here. And then we're going to kind of wrap up, I think. So sorry we're running a little long today, but I figure it's better to get the info. So let's see, if I go ahead and take the... I'm just thinking about what the best way to do this is. Probably the elliptical marquee tool, or actually, it would be even easier is the brush tool. So what do we know about the brush tool? Well, we know the brush tool typically, unless you tell it otherwise, is round. And you can make it quite large. So let's go ahead and... So what I'm going to do... Oops, excuse me. I'm definitely not going to do that. I'm going to go into Quick Mask. And I'm going to pick up the eraser tool. And let's see. This is kind of a crazy way of doing it, but it's going to work. I'm going to hold the Shift key down. Oh, actually, that's not quite right. Let's go back to our brush definition here. When I'm making selection edges, as a general rule, I keep them hard edged. And the reason for that is because you might find yourself with a selection that has a fuzzy kind of boundary, and And usually when you draw that out of the background and put it on another background, it's going to appear as if it has this halo around it. And that's not usually a very desirable effect. So we got that down. That's fine for now. And this flummoxes a lot of people. They'll be like, Photoshop is only painting red, and how do I make this thing, you know, do anything? You want to get out of Quick Mask, which is down here. And now you're back in regular Photoshop land. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to use my fill tool. And so I have the selection made. It's all ready to go. Let's go ahead and select Edit Fill. And I actually think that this hot pink color is kind of perfect. So we could make sure that that's the foreground color. You can tell because it's in the front. So that's the foreground color. And we could pick a different color, but I think this totally is worth it. Oh, aren't you glad I made that decision? No. So at this point, we're not gonna, you know, it's not gonna be like this. It's not a permanent state. So what I really want to do is create like a color overlay. And so one really great way to do that is just to create a layer that has some color on it and use one of these blending modes to blend the color. That looks cool. Color is what I usually use to do this, but the pink is so bright it looks a little crazy. So hue is another good option. I actually really like the saturation option too in this case. Okay, I'm gonna go with that. That's too bright. Sorry. It's a creative process. Yeah, I'll stick with hue. So that's great. And then if I want to get really fancy, I can certainly come into Quick Mask, or I don't even need to go into Quick Mask if I know that this is going to stay where it is. I can just hit Apple D. And one thing that is kind of killing me right now is this little area of leaf. So we could do a couple of things. We could just use our magic wand tool to select the leaves. And it's probably a good idea for us to go ahead and get on the other layer to select this. And let's see. I'm going to get a little bit closer to the subject here. Oh, we're in negative mode right now. That's why it's not working. I literally could not see it. Okay, so in this case, we're trying to kind of like, oops, excuse me, too far. We're trying to kind of liberate some of this green stuff. And it's going to be kind of tricky because it's really finely detailed. We know that this is about where the boundary of our color is. And so, yeah, it's going to be hard. So probably rather than using a magic wand tool, in this case, it might be our best bet to activate the color layer and grab a brush and probably 30 or 40 pixels will do it. Whoops, sorry. I mean an eraser. Sorry. The brush and the eraser are kind of interchangeable depending on what side of a layer you're on. And in this case, here's a classic example of why eraser tools are kind of dangerous. So you can see here it's deleting layer 1, which is not what we want. We want to be on layer 4 for actually deleting stuff. And you can see that with a kind of, we could use a fuzzier brush for this. Actually, this would be a great opportunity for a fuzzy brush. And we don't have to get like every single little detail. We just want to kind of get the big stuff out of there. So little touches like this can just make such a massive difference in, you know, whether your image looks kind of intentional and artful or kind of thrown together. And, you know, I'll admit that it is hard to tell the difference when you look at a lot of contemporary art. There we go. All done. So what are we going to do with this big leafy thing? Well, I think, again, it's just a matter of layer blending. So I'm going to go ahead and it's already has a sort of weak layer blending mode on it. I actually really like that, where it's kind of adding texture but not adding a lot of color, because we already have a lot of insane color in the image. That kind of makes me wonder what would happen if we went to like some of these modes down here. No. That looks pretty cool, actually. But it holds a lot of visual weight, and we've got a lot of visual weight like down in this sort of center area of the image. So let me just scroll through a few of these and see what they look like. This kind of makes the whole image, I mean, it already looks like kind of a nuclear holocaust in the garden, but there is definitely such a thing as too much. So I think I'm going to go with this one, which is, it's like multiply, only it's like more multiplying. And I think I'm done with the image, and I'm also done with this demo. Now, I'm not actually done. I'm done. Not done. I'm just done. So we're going to save this. Now, remember what we said about data security, or, you know, just not losing your project? Save early and often. So I already have it saved as a PSD, which is cool. We should definitely save that. Okay. And then to turn it in, you would want to save it as a JPEG. And so what we're asking you to do is to go to Save As, go to JPEG, and this is fine. If you use Cloud Documents, you can save it to your Cloud Documents. And here, you can go ahead and make it a large file. This is the highest quality mode, and you know, we're grading you on it, so I would make it the highest quality mode if I were you. And then you can see it's pretty small. It's a very small file, actually. So yeah, just click OK, and you've got your JPEG copy all ready to go. Now, one thing you may note about your JPEG copy is that it does not have layers. So if you ever want to go back and edit this or rework the layers or anything, you should go to the Photoshop file. Okay? I'll see you all later this week or in 5 minutes, depending on who you are. And have a great time till then. Bye.